The electronic parking brake failed in this car approximately about 2 years ago. It failed over a series of months, but eventually I had to give in and fit a second-hand unit. At the same time I fitted new handbrake cables, because apparently they're one of the biggest problems, of failure for the electronic parking brake itself. So unfortunately recently the replacement unit has been failing on me. Sometimes it won't come on, sometimes it won't come off. Sometimes it won't do it with the hand release, the button release, and sometimes it won't do it with the clutch release. So there's no rhyme or reason to it. So luckily I kept the original unit and sent this one off for complete refurbishment. So this is what you have with the Scenic parking brake. So the electronic, the wires plug in there, which operates the electronics inside this box. You have the two cables coming off. This is the emergency release that you'll find in the boot under the carpet. When the cable comes up, it goes up into like a little yellow handle. You see it like a T-shaped handle in the boot. And the other one actually operates the handbrake itself. This fits onto this part, and each of these goes to the wheels and operates the handbrakes. So this is what I was saying about one of the biggest failures. These cables being stiff, and that adds resistance to the motors, and it burns them out quicker. This isn't too bad. But that was the reason I changed that. The cable's on the car itself, so I don't need that bit. This is the only bit I need. So I need to fit that now. I'm not sure I can see it without the car being jacked up. But from memory, the parking brake lives behind this wheel, and that goes to the axle where the cable separator lives. I'm not sure what it's called. So next step is to get all this jacked up and get that swapped over. So with the offside rear wheel off, you can see where the electronic parking brake actually lives in the car. And it just bolts up onto the floor. And if we follow the cables around, you can see where it meets the handbrake cables going along the rear axle there. So I think the first thing I need to do is carpet. If you remove this, you can see the emergency release. So if I pull that and release the handbrake, that's the handbrake released. And then remove this handle, which I'll probably need 2 hands for. So remove this handle, and then this bolt from underneath, and then just feed through. I'd imagine this would be a lot easier on the ramp. There was a plastic cover covering the rear axle, and this car isn't great for jacking points and points for the axle stands. But so I had to juggle it around a bit. I had to jack it up on the axle, take the wheel off, remove the bolts from the cover, and then put the wheel back on, lower the car back down, remove the cover, so I could then jack it back up and put the axle stand into the rear axle as well. But here we are. So now we're ready for the parking brake to come off itself, and then we can get the cables. Just had a quick look, and as far as I could tell, there's just 2 30mm bolts, one at that end and one by there. So I'll take those out now, and hopefully that's all there is. So with this unbolted now, think his wire unplug's got to come out next. So take this out, and then it should be a case of moving on down to the axle. So I've unplugged that, but before moving down to the axle, I thought I'd actually take the cables off the wheels. So there's a 30mm bolt in the back here that I can turn. It should give me enough. Yeah, so I can get that cable off there. So I do the same to the other side, and then move down to the last bit. So I'm having to do this upside down just for lack of space. But on the back of the axle, this is what we want to remove. So this is clipped on, and then from, if memory serves, I just got to slide it up. I've disconnected the handbrake cables from each wheel. So they're a bit fiddly, they feed through the axle itself, and there's a bit of a faff. And I've started pulling it out, and I very nearly forgot. Just about see that. There's a couple of tug bits holding the cable going up into the boot release. So I'll pop those out, and then the whole thing should just pull out. So she's finally out. Bit of a struggle, but got there in the end. So this is where we got. We got the parking brake. This is where all the electronics are, and you got two cables going off here. Got the emergency manual release that goes into the boot, and the other one comes down into this slider. It's not in place properly, but this goes back and forth, and this cable pulls on this one side, and the resistance pulls the other side, and these go to each of the wheels. So these cables are pretty good, so I'll probably keep those. So I think the only thing we're replacing is actual EPP itself for the refurbished one. So I need to strip all this down and swap them over. So now everything's ready for a refitting. It was a bit of a struggle getting it out. I'm sure last time everything just passed over the axle, but I managed to put too much strain on this cable and bend it all out of shape. But luckily the old one on that side was fine, so I switched those over. You've got to make sure the right side as well, because these are different lengths. So I think in theory what I'm supposed to do now is to fit this back on there and then pass it back over the axle, but I'm not going to risk that. So I'm going to fit them both separately and then connect them once they're in the car. I think that's probably the safest route to go. So this is the way I thought I'd do it. So rather than putting anything up, just pass that cable over, get into position, make sure the handbrake cable, no, the ones going to the wheels, clicked in. So that's one side, that's the other. And then make sure this is slotting in properly. Sometimes it can just, if it's up there, it can just pop out. So that's nice and secure now. So I'll get that back on the axle, and then I can get the box of electronics here bolted back up, and then get the manual release bolted up. And then it's a case of fitting those cables back onto the wheels, and I think we're all done. So that's all the cables finished. Just a quick little tip before we attach that back to the axle. Get these fitted, because you're going to have to go back and forth a few times just to get them on. And the last step was fitting the handle back on the manual release. As you can see, it's all bolted back up now, everything back in place. So it's just a case of testing it now. Don't know if I'm expected to cycle this a couple of times. wasn't too bad a job. Only took about 4 hours I think altogether. I had lunch in between, so it was hard to tell. Yeah, it's a bit fiddly, but you know, you can save yourself hundreds by doing a job like this. And give me a little scale when I started it up. It said give me the check brake fault on the dashboard, but just cycling a couple of times, I think the cables needed to tighten up, and the little box of trucks needed to, like, you know, calibrate itself. So yeah, happy. So I'm gonna put this back on now. I think first of all I need to drop it back down on this wheel and then fit that back. So yeah, next job, fit these new discs and pads, I think, because they look terrible.